Good day. I am good. How are you, Hunter?
Oh, I am doing so well. This has been such an amazing day so far. We've had so many great speakers, and now I'm just so excited to talk to you. We had such a fun sync the other day, and I'm like, oh, it's my friend Lachelle. We're all pals now.
Exactly. As you know, I told you we're gonna have fun with this topic, so I'm revving to go.
And are you calling in from the office today? It looks very boardroom chic today.
I came into the office today. I'm typically a telecommuter, but I said I did not want technology to mess this opportunity up to share some great insights to all that's joining today. So I wanted to ensure that we didn't have any of those hiccups.
I appreciate that. So before we jump into the questions, Lachelle, is there anything you'd like to share with us about yourself, with where you're at, your career journey, just any intentions for the next 30 minutes? I open the floor to you.
Yeah, you know what I will tell you first and foremost, grab a pen and some paper because I'm going to give you lots of insights, and you will have a homework assignment that you'll be given as well. Because I believe when you're coming and you're investing time and energy in a conversation like this, we definitely want to make sure that you're walking away with things that you can put into action immediately. In regards to me, I live in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities. I've been with UHG for it'll be 11 years in May. I love what I do. Talent is so very important and has been a thread throughout my career. The fun fact that I like to tell people is I actually went to school to be an engineer. And here I am, a person that is doing talent in a very different way, but still bringing forth those engineering, things that I love so much. So, I'm just ready to, you know, share and have an engaging conversation.
I love that, Lachelle. So get your pen and paper, y'all, because Lachelle is going to give us practical things to do. She's going to help engineer your trajectory and your story. And I just want to highlight we did a sync call I mentioned the other day. And Lachelle, I wrote down something you said because it's just so beautiful. You said, I just want people to get where they want to be, but you got to know yourself and put in the work.
That's right.
So I think that just kind of sums up what we're going to talk about in the next 30 minutes, and just a testament to how wonderful you are and how you want to help people.
Thank
And
you.
before we jump into more stories or questions, in the spirit of helping people, UHG is part of our virtual job fair tomorrow. So this is something that you can come back to. You can meet more folks from the team, and you can apply if you are interested to open roles. So a little shout out to that. That is tomorrow, Thursday. Okay, Lachelle, let's get into it. So for you, what is the difference between a job and a career?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was thinking about that one. I think when you think about a job, it's like, it's the ends to means. You got to do something, it may not be something that you love, but you're trying to achieve a goal. When I think about a career, it is something that gets you up every day. You're excited, there's a purpose, there's a drive, and it's a building block. You build upon where you really want to go. What I like to compare it to is I like playing checkers, but I love playing chess. So if I look at the two, they definitely do have a different outcome, but the board is the same. It's just the pieces on the board is different. And so I think that's sometimes the way you can look at, having a job and having a career.
I love that. I'm just full of TV references today for some reason. I used to be a big fan I'm still a big fan of The West Wing, which was, like fictional, like
Yeah,
series about, and the president at the time, he loved chess. And he would say to his other, his cabinet, it was see the whole board.
that's right. And that's an excellent call out because sometimes we can be very tunnel vision and we
Mm-hmm.
don't see the whole board. And so when you don't see the whole board, and I think that goes into when you start to get frustrated and you're like, oh, I should be further along, I should be doing this. And sometimes you have to check and see, am I just looking just down a narrow, pathway, or am I looking at the wider scope of the field, or the chessboard, as we would say it, too. So
Right, because there isn't, there's all these different pieces, there's all these different moves, there's the same thing going on the other sides. You got to look more than just one pawn ahead. You got to, okay, that rook over there in like 6 moves, So there's all this stuff, dropping on the little chess knowledge that I now get.
I'm still a novice, so I'm still growing my game as well. So
Yeah, I love it. There's always room for growth, progress, not
that's
perfection,
right.
right?
That's right.
So I love that you just mentioned about like, okay, well, what if I'm feeling like I'm not as far along as I should be, which there's that word, right? So have there been times, Lachelle, in your career when you felt that you're not advancing quick enough? And if so, what advice would you give to someone who feels that they should be further along in their career than they are? And what are some actionable steps that they can take to change that?
I definitely have felt that in my career. And what I will tell you is, this comes the self-assessment. This is where sometimes I am very much a heads down. I love my job. And sometimes when your head's down and you haven't lifted up to kind of see what's going on, you find yourself where you're like, okay, why am I not advancing much more, faster, quicker? And so you got to take that self reflection of saying, you got to assess what's going on. What am I missing? And one of the things I actually like to do is go to my performance review. I'm like, in my performance review, am I progressing? Am I staying the same? Am I hearing the same from my managers, my stakeholders? And then I take that step and being like, okay, maybe I am doing that and I need to switch it up. So then I grab a thought partner, somebody who I can express, a trusted advisor, to say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm seeing. I need a plan to move away or to grow in the direction that I want to. And with that trusted advisor, I want someone who's going to ask me hard questions, because when you've got to move, and you're going to disrupt things, you got to be prepared for that. And that goes back to that self reflection. That goes back to, being ready and doing the hard work. So those are some things that I've done in my career that has actually helped me. And I had a great friend. I was talking to her, and she actually drew out what I was expressing. And 2 years later, that plan came to life for me in my career. So, you can never underestimate having a good group of people around you to really help you move to the next level. You can't do it by yourself. And that's definitely something that I would call out, as well as something actionable that you can do.
I love that. I love the synergy of the chats today. We were talking about who's on your team, who's on your board, who's on your circle. We don't have to do it alone, right?
You do not. And you should
Yeah.
not. You should
Right.
not do it alone.
Yeah. And anybody that's, maybe where you are looking at them, compare and despair, you think they're doing great. They didn't do it alone either.
No, they did not. so, so if somebody tells you that they did it all on their own, I would really question that, because we all need someone to help us to get there. So yeah, definitely incorporate others. And that goes back to your network, right? That it sounds like you guys are just recently talking about. You got to have a good network.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting questions in the chat already, Lachelle. So this is working. You're firing it up. So we're going to touch on those, friends. So keep those coming. Okay. We are going to pepper them in. And one thing I wanted to offer up to, with the word, I should have done this, I should be here, I should be that. Someone offered up to me at one point that, for me, I'm only going to speak for myself right now, that word should, I also have an association with another word with that, which is shame. And there's an acronym, like, oh, I should be further along. There's an acronym to kind of pivot that, or help me check myself a little bit. Shame could stand for should have already mastered everything, which is impossible.
Exactly. You can't do it all. You really, really can't. And I mean, and I think it goes back to your goals. What is it? Are you keeping an eye on the goals that you have for your career, for your growth? If you're not keeping an eye on that, then that also pops up and you're like, oh man, I should be doing this. But if you're keeping an eye on it, if you're making sure that you've got things written out, write it down, so that you can go back to it and make sure that you're making the progress that you feel that you need to, along with any of the feedback that you're getting from stakeholders, leaders, individuals that you're working with.
Yeah, I love, thank you for sharing your experience of writing down that plan with your friend and how it became actualized a few years
Mhm.
later. And, the power of pen to paper, of really like putting stuff concrete for ourselves to see what we want. And that's great that you had a friend that did that with you. It reminds me of that old adage, something along the lines of, uh, it's what you dreamed of, what you dreamed of having tomorrow is what you have today, and
Mhm.
it's like, well, that means that you can keep dreaming and that that tomorrow can come, but you got to put in that work that we're talking about.
Yep, that's so true.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of questions coming in. I'm loving it. We're gonna
Yep.
pepper them in. Keep them coming, friends. So so here's a question. So how do you know when it's time to take the next step in your career, either at a current company or maybe somewhere else?
Yeah, so I've got two things that are like my levers when it comes down to this question. It is I've met my objective, hey,
Mm,
I wanted to come in and build this experience, this skill set, I wanted to advance in this mindset. And so I've achieved it. And so now it's time for me to move on. The other particular lever is I'm frustrated. I'm like once again and that not moving and growing in the way that I want to. And so I've got to assess, is this the right, is this right for me anymore? Is it just time for me to move? And what I tell people is when you're at that brink, disruption happens. And so understand what disruption does for you. It actually makes you get uncomfortable because that is what's happening when you are, feeling like you're stuck or you can't move or you're just experiencing some things. And I've definitely have felt that in my own world as well. Like I said, I'm a person that likes to heads down. I love what I do. And sometimes I actually stay too long in a role. And when that happens, you get pegged. People is like, oh, she's been there for 8 years. That's all she can do. And so then that becomes a trap. So once again, it's going back to I had to start to say, okay, Lachelle, what is it that you want to achieve? All right, you want to have better stakeholder management. This is going to give you that experience. Okay, you've gotten to that level. You know what? Maybe it's time for you to proceed to the next things. But you got to be able to, understand what you're trying to achieve, and that's usually the advice that I give people. No matter what job you have, know what you want out of it. It's a building block. Your careers are built on blocks. So get what you want and then assess about moving on to what's next. And I always say, leave on a good note. That's always a plus.
mm,
Then they'll want
hmm.
you back.
That's
So,
right. And we'll be happy to, refer you, sing your praises, understand that
right.
it's time to move on. All that stuff is good. Maybe there'll be mentors and
Mhm.
sponsors from your previous employment that want to help you on your career journey. It's always good to leave on a good note, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And on a similar note, we had a question from the audience that I'm going to pepper in here. When we're crafting these career journeys and looking ahead, someone asked, what are some of the common mistakes to avoid when crafting your career narrative?
Common mistakes. I don't know if there's a mistake in there. I think it's really about you understanding your story and you being able to articulate that to other people. If you're putting down something that maybe is not 100% true, or maybe you're not confident in talking about that experience, maybe those could be some things that you want to think about. But you're talking about you. I mean, and so you're good, you're bad, it's part of your story. It's who it makes you who you are. So to me, I think the first thing is actually putting it down on a timeline and really mapping it out, and look at those experiences, those accomplishments, those impacts that you had, and tell those stories, tell that narrative about your journey.
I love that. Great, great advice. So on the topic of uh, being in maybe a transition and looking for a new job, another great question from the audience here. Courtney Cotton asks, I'd love to hear how to approach the conversation of DE&I in the interview process. I didn't realize until recently, upon taking an interest in tech, that this is a conversation that's okay to have and very necessary. I have an idea of how I'd like to approach it, but I'd love to hear from you.
So if I'm reading the question right, DEI has come up in the interview, and she wants to know how to really approach it.
Yeah,
From
or to
DEI,
bring it up in the interview yourself,
or to bring
potentially.
or to bring it up as a question
Mm-hmm.
in an interview. Well, I would say, from a DEI perspective, it is to understand where they're at as an organization on their journey. How has DEI impacted them as an interviewer? What's their contribution to the culture of an inclusive culture in the organization? I think those are all good questions for people to be like, how do they show up from an interviewer perspective, but I think also from an organization. And I think it's also important to communicate as a candidate that diversity is important to you, and really define and share what that means, whether that's representation within leadership, whether that's, create, space, safe space environment for, a person to share and be heard and seen. So I think all of those pieces are very important. And I think actually it's a great thing to do, because, you're making a decision on where you want to go and where you want to work and where you want to invest your talent and skills at. So those are just some of the things that I would say.
I love that. It makes me think of when we had a chat earlier today that I was listening in on, of a speaker brought up the importance of boundaries in the workplace. And that can even involve in the interview process, because if you're starting to get maybe some vibes that this isn't necessarily the right place and you take it, then you might be, inviting an invasion of our own boundaries, right? So it's about
Yeah.
like asking those questions and feeling it out.
Yeah, I mean, and I like to tell people it's a two-way communication here. They're taking the time to, assess you. You need to take the time to assess that organization as well. If that is one of the things that's important to you, I would tell you to ask, those questions. You want to be smart about it, but definitely don't let it pass without asking the question if it's something that is definitely on your must list as a future organization that you want to work for.
Absolutely. So let's jump back into this story, this narrative. So what are some of the ways that folks can manage their own story internally, such as, in performance reviews within the company? And then what are some of the ways to manage the story externally, such as in LinkedIn, networking sessions, and such?
Yeah, one of the things I like to tell people is to have a brief bio on themselves. In our organization, when a new person comes on, they usually have to create an intro slide, because they are being new to the organization, to their team. But what I've found is using that tool beyond just their maybe being new is actually people that you're first time meeting, is to let people know your journey, where you've been, what you've worked on, organizations that you've been a part of. I know that it has been very strategic in my own career when I, set up 30-minute meetings with people. And what I do is I send my bio ahead of time, or my intro slide ahead of time, because I know time can go by fast, but I want them to understand the depth and the breadth of who I am and what I'm capable of doing, and what I've done, to be honest. And it also sets the tone for that conversation as well. And so I think it's smart when you can, that's a great way of being able to do that internally. And I like to say, you got a limited view and you got an extended view. And so there are many different templates and tools to be able to tell your story. And I've used them, the limited, where I'm like, hey, this is a quick, you got some pictures or, some other different themes about me. And then there's something a little bit more deeper, around the work or that I work on inside the organization. So you just want to be strategic about that. And we have those things inside of United. And I think also too, be mindful about your audience. So if you're talking to an executive, are you talking to a stakeholder? Are you talking to, a new teammate? You want to tweak it for the audience that you are going to. And what I like to tell people, you leave them with a piece of collateral, because if they're in some meeting or a conversation about, hey, we're going to be starting this, or we're looking for somebody who, is comfortable, starting something new. Guess what? If they've got your bio now that they can pass along to others to say, you know what? I remember Lachelle said this in her bio or in our conversation. I'm going to pass this along. And now it starts to open up other doors for you. And I'll quickly touch on external. What I like to tell people is, from an external perspective, there's so many ways to tell your story. Whether it's about blogging, LinkedIn, you can put a post out there, talk about the work that you're doing, or something that you're really, passionate about, you're making impact around. It's a great, platform for you to be able to do that. Get involved in professional organizations. It's another excellent way to get out there, to get involved, to tell your story, to test out your story. Leverage family, friends, and, do the small steps and practice and see what people say. Even, some family members don't even know what you do. So it's a great opportunity for you to kind of showcase that through a visual and let, folks give you feedback, and then test it out and see how people respond to it. So those are some things that you can do inside your organization as well as outside your organization.
I love that, to test it out, theater speak a little bit. We do an out of town tryout, see how it works, work out the hiccups of the show. And, and you do it with trusted friends and family that will give you positive, hopefully reinforcing feedback that, you're like, this was maybe too much, or maybe that's not enough, or I'd like to know more, or what about that funny thing, or, like those little sparks of things. But you're also great at speaking to people. You didn't even mention that. Whatever it is, because these people know us, right?
Exactly. And I will tell you is that I have a tribe, I have a BOD, our board of directors inside our UHG, and I leverage them, to help me even, sharpen up my own bio that I use for this opportunity. And so I want to give a shout out to them that we'll be talking later today, but appreciate them and the contribution that they give to me and helping me further along in my journey. So your BODs are very important and can play a very critical part in helping you craft your narrative.
I love that. So we have just 5 minutes left, Lachelle. I told you it was just gonna fly. Just like this. Here we go. Just one hand like that. So we got a question from Ruby in the chat, and Ruby asks, what are your thoughts on how others play a role controlling your narrative? How people are in positions of influence and authority can play a role to you being hired or culture fit. So what, I love that you talked about these different bios, these different ways, these bits of collateral that you mentioned that folks can have, but then it's out of our hands at a certain point.
Well, it is true. I mean, I will say, I reflect, if you have a manager that maybe is not, you don't see eye to eye. And sometimes in organizations, definitely managers can play a role in, people movement. But this is where I say you got to take control of that. And I encourage people to take control of that, which is, one of the reasons why I, started to encourage people to write their narrative, because there's more than just one person's perspective or view of you. And I think you have to be assured that, I'm more than that. And so this is where you also help influencers, people who want to champion. You've got to give them the words to say about you, as you are developing your relationship. I can't tell you how many times people have asked me to mentor them or to sponsor them. And I tell them, I don't even know you. So how can I help you when I don't know you? And so the way that you do that is to help me with your narrative. What are experiences are you having? What things are you maybe worked on a project and you have the success and now you're following up to say, hey, Lachelle, I just want to share some good news with you. I was able to do this, and this. You've got to help those ones who want to champion you, want to definitely tell your narrative. You got to equip them with that. And I will tell you, it may not always work. Don't worry. Dust the as they say, brush off the dust and keep moving to someone who will definitely be a great advocate for you. And it doesn't not just mean just inside your organization. There is the power of influence outside of an organization too. So don't limit that to just that view. Definitely broaden that, because there's influencers that can influence people inside your organization as well. So definitely broaden your view on that take is too.
I love that. I always akin it to when you're, if you applied for college or maybe early on, it's like you got to get those letters of recommendation, and you got to give those people those bullet points of what you want them to say.
That's right.
And it's the same now. And I love too when you're like, oh, some updates, this, and this. I think, we like the brevity of like clear and clean of just like, oh, here's a couple of lines of what I've been up to, because people want to help, but people are also very busy. And it's nice when it can just be like, oh, that's cool. Oh, Lachelle just did that. That's awesome. Okay, next
Right.
work email, but I'm going to remember that,
Right. And I mean, it's the way that, I remember a young lady, she wanted a certain role and she didn't, but she quarter, she wrote me a note and she said, Lachelle, this is my experience. And guess what I was able to do? I then could go to that recruiter, that hiring manager, and say, look, this is what she's done for the last, 6 months. This is just showing, who she is, her commitment to her development. She's not limited to a no. She's working on her yes, and to be a part of this organization. And so guess what? She did come to work for us. So those, you just never know where you find people who are very supportive. But once again, you've got to equip people to tell your narrative.
I love that. Lachelle, can you believe it? We're out of time. I would love to hear from you though. One last thing. If you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Take more risk.
Woo!
I like to play it safe, but I realize that there's always calculated risk, I would say.
Yeah.
But I would probably say, definitely I would take a little bit more risk in my career. One of the things I would love to do and still can't do is live abroad for a little while and have that experience. I have traveled globally, but I have not lived there in some global places. So that's still on my list, and but definitely take a little bit more risk.
Oh, I love
Now,
that.
we cannot end. I got to give my homework assignment really
Okay,
quick.
give your homework. Oh, of
So I was
course. Thank you for reminding me.
1 minute. So
Yes.
the action is if you don't have a bio, write a bio. And write it in the next week. Partner up with somebody, write it up. There's so many bios with this summit. Go out there, check out people's bio, then share it, get feedback around it, and then go out there and test it on 3 people. Go out there, meet 3 new people, and send them your bio and set up 30-minute networks with them and see how it goes. And we would love to hear back. If you do it there, I think definitely there's an opportunity to share back what your experience was. So
Oh, I
there's
love
your
that.
homework.
Thank you, Teach. We will take that homework in. And if we want to report, send in our homework to you. Is LinkedIn the best way to reach out? How can
It
folks
is.
stay connected? Okay.
LinkedIn is the best way.
Okay, cool. Well, Lachelle, it was such a treat to get to chat with you again today. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for taking the extra couple of minutes. I really appreciate you. It was such a delight. And I look forward to having more of your team with us tomorrow at the job fair.
All right. Thank you, Hunter.
Have a great day.
You too.